Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, as I'm sure you're aware, marks the 15th of the blessed month of Ramadan. That is both the midpoint of this month and it is the anniversary, according to narrations from Ahlul Bayt, of the birth of the beloved grandson of our Prophet, Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba alayhi salatu wassalam. It's an occasion of happiness and rejoicing. It was the third year after the migration of the Prophet in Medina when this happy occasion took place. The good tidings were brought to the Prophet, and what we find is very interesting. The Prophet spoke of and treated Imam Hassan alayhi salam, and then a few months later when his brother Imam Hussein, Sayyid al-Shuhada, was born, these two brothers as his own children. He did not call them anything other than his abna. He said that they were his children. Now, for us, this might seem to be kind of a normal and a natural thing. Grandchildren are close to their grandparents. They are attributed to their grandparents. And in our day and age, it's not unusual for a person to be as close to their daughter's children as they are to their son's children. But in the time of the Prophet, that was not the general culture or the expectation of Arabian society. In fact, it was one of the accusations that was made against the Prophet, and one of the means by which people would mock the Prophet, that he did not have a son. He did not have male children. And so it was the culture of that time that the continuation of a family, the continuation of a legacy, the strength and the power of an individual and a particular family depends on having sons. It depends on having grandsons from your sons. It was the male line that continued a family, that continued a lineage, that continued and gave honor to a family. And Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhim as-salatu was-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi. Their birth is one example we have of the way in which not just the teachings of Islam, but the life of the Prophet and the relationships of the Prophet overturned people's ignorance and their superficial expectations to say that it is not a blood connection or a genealogical connection or a traditional family lineage that determines whether you are able to pass on a legacy. But it is a connection that is spiritual above all else. And the relationship of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, by virtue of which he called them his sons, was certainly not based on the pre-Islamic Arabian custom, because they were not the sons of his son, they were the sons of his daughter. But it also was not based on a broader extension that we might have, which is that your grandkids are your grandkids whether they are from your daughter or from your son. It was first and foremost a relationship that was rooted in and based in Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein being heirs of the teachings and the piety and the purity and the leadership of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. So we have two lessons. One lesson is that sometimes we think that continuity is going to come for our families, for our affairs, through superficial means and through customary means. That is not the case. The concept of the family was broadened and corrected by Allah depriving the Prophet of any son who reached adulthood and granting the Prophet a daughter who was Fatimatu Zahra salamullahi alayha. And then making the descendants of the Prophet all come through his daughter Fatimatu Zahra. So in terms of a genealogy, in terms of a lineage, the conception that discriminated between sons and daughters was corrected and was changed in the words of the Prophet, but also in the lived example of the Prophet. But more broadly than that, we see that the nature of praise the Prophet gave to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein was not the praise and the relationship of a father to a son or a grandfather to a grandchild, but it was a relationship that brought them at the level of being part of Islam and part of the Islamic message, so that you cannot understand Islam if you do not have a connection to Imam Hassan alayhi salam, if you do not have a connection to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Their relationship with the Prophet was a relationship of Islam before it was a relationship of blood. And this is what I want to talk about because we have a limited time today. I want to just give you a quick kind of summary of the history of Ahlul Bayt as many historians have seen it. And then I would like us to examine what is wrong with that history. What is missing in that history? And if we can appreciate what is missing in that history, then you will understand why I said that the relationship and the honor of Imam Hassan is not primarily about his relationship by blood and lineage to the Prophet, but it is by his relationship in spirit and in the essence of Islam to our Prophet. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You'll notice that when many historians write about the family of the Prophet, and these historians, some of them are non-Muslim, many of them are Muslims as well, who are not followers of the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wassalam, they often make similar mistakes, whether they are Muslim or whether they are not Muslim. And this is the way that that history is often described. Imam Ali alayhi salam was a very strict and a very, you can almost see people using the word uncompromising and inflexible type of a personality. What he thought was right is what he would do, regardless of what the consequences might be. And therefore, after the Prophet, he asserted a certain position, and even if that caused disagreement in the Muslim Ummah, Imam Ali continued to assert what he believed and what he maintained. Even if it caused a civil war, Imam Ali continued to assert what he said and what he thought was right. Even if there may have been a quicker path to victory, Imam Ali refused to take it because he wanted to do things in the way that he thought was right. Now, you and I might see this as praise for Imam Ali, and right now my concern is not that this is good and not a criticism, although that is our firm belief that that inflexibility, and that lack of compromise was not because of stubbornness, but it was because of principle. And there were no shortcuts to the aims that Imam Ali had. There were shortcuts to political power. There were shortcuts to an unstable peace, but there were no shortcuts to the higher goals that Imam Ali wanted to accomplish. That is our belief, but that is not my point right now. My point right now is to say that this is a characterization that people have of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, regardless of whether they see that as a perfect role model for us to derive guidance from, or whether they see it as something that was worthy of perhaps a little bit of questioning. And in some cases, they might say that this was not as ideal as the example of the caliphs who came before Amir al-Mu'mineen. That opinion does exist, and it is the default opinion in the Sunni community that the first caliph was greater than the remaining companions. After the first caliph, it was the second caliph. Both of them were, in the view of the majority of the Muslims, more worthy of being followed and had a higher degree of virtue than Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. It's only when they come to the third caliph that they say, now maybe we can have a little bit of disagreement, and either they are equal, or perhaps the third caliph is the third best, or perhaps Imam Ali is the third best. But even here, the majority opinion is that the third caliph also is superior to Imam Ali alayhi salam. That is the majority opinion of the Sunni community. The reason for that is partially because of the inflexibility and the lack of compromise that I described. So the consequences that came were that there was a civil war. There were disagreements among the companions. A majority of the companions and almost all of the Ansar followed Imam Ali, but some of them, they followed Muawiyah, and Syria, and then later Egypt broke away from the mainstream of the Muslim community and went into rebellion. This was the consequence of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam deciding not to compromise with Muawiyah. So this is background. Then we come to Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam. And what you will often find is that many historians say that Imam Hassan had a different personality than his father. Because where Imam Ali alayhi salam was uncompromising, Imam Hassan alayhi salam was willing to compromise. Again, I am not giving us the principles that we believe accurately describe the character of Imam Hassan, but the impression that many historians have. Where Imam Ali was idealistic, Imam Hassan was pragmatic. Where Imam Ali was uncompromising, they say that Imam Hassan was willing to compromise. Where Imam Ali was willing to go to battle and to cause even hundreds or thousands of people to die in order to establish a certain point, they say that Imam Hassan did not like to fight and did not like to do battle. They say that while Imam Ali was very harsh and very simple in his personal life, Imam Hassan alayhi salam enjoyed living a good life. And he lived well, ate well, dressed well, and made use of God's resources and blessings in a way that Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam did not. Now, on a superficial level, some of those facts are accurate. Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam was known for having a very well-appointed dinner that he would invite all people to join and partake of. Rich, poor, free, slaves, beggars, and many guests would share a meal with Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam. Imam Ali was also generous, but he never gave anybody a sumptuous or a fancy meal. Those who had the privilege of joining Imam Ali on his table or in his dinner, they had a simple meal like Imam Ali alayhi salam himself had. So there were some superficial differences, but the reason for those differences, according to many Muslims, is that Imam Hassan had a different personality. So far, we've seen what historians have said about Imam Ali and historians have said about Imam Hassan. Now there's one further step that completes that circle. Because historians say that after Imam Hassan was martyred and left this world, and Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam became the leader of Ahlul Bayt, that was his public role, and according to his followers, he was the Imam of the time. His practice, his personality departed from Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam and returned in some way to that uncompromising, unflexible, and idealistic way of Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wasalam. He was not afraid of taking a stand. He was not afraid of doing battle. He was not afraid of martyrdom. He was very simple in his lifestyle and very harsh and very scrupulous in putting into practice the teachings of Islam. So, if you look at historians and if you look at many people who have written about the early years of Islam, then you will find that it's as if there is no consistent thread in the decision making, in the personality, and in the way of life of these three people. Amir al-Mu'mineen and Imam Hussein alayhi salam seem to be on one side, and Imam Hassan alayhi salam seems to be on the other side. And some historians and writers actually believe that this is accurate and this is the case. They have even attributed a statement to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam that I and my son Hussein are alike, and we are loyal to and close to the people of Kufa. But Imam Hassan, he does his own thing. So they have attributed even to the mouth of Amir al-Mu'mineen that sentiment that there was a difference in that practice and in that character. Now, this is a question. When I come and I say that I am a follower of Ahlul Bayt, and I believe that they were all a single nur, that the light of illumination which came with the Prophet was the same light of illumination that existed in Lady Fatima and in Amir al-Mu'mineen and in Imam Hassan and in Imam Hussein all the way until the last Imam. And that if any one of the Imams were in the situation in which another Imam were to be found, then their words would have been the exact same. Their actions would have been the exact same. Their teaching and their example would have been the exact same. Their seerah and their practice was not divergent, but it was united and it was unanimous. Then it might seem like this is a far-fetched type of a belief. Some people would say that it is not historical, but it is theological. You have a belief as a follower of Ahlul Bayt. You want to see consistency between Imam Ali and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. And so you bend history and you bend facts in order to make it seem as if there was a consistent message when there was no consistent message. That is a question which many people have when they look at these life events of Imam Hassan alayhi salam and Imam Hussein, and before them Amir al-Mu'mineen, and the analysis that we have from some historians. So which is it? Are the followers of Ahlul Bayt correct in saying that there was a single nur and a single teaching and a single wisdom which was brought by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, and which was followed loyally by all of the later Imams, and those things that seem to be divergent are not really different? Or is it true that each Imam had his own way? Each personality had his own manner of approaching different questions. Imam Hassan was not Amirul Mu'mineen. Imam Hussein was not Imam Hassan. Is it ahistorical, meaning is it inaccurate historically for us to say that there is a common thread? Now, there are certain questions that cannot be answered in any kind of objective way just by looking at certain facts that are reported in books of history. Whether you see a consistency or whether you see an inconsistency, whether you see one narrative or another narrative, is not because you are objectively looking at facts, but it is because you have certain beliefs. You have a certain worldview or a certain theology. If I see, for example, that it is reported that the Prophet foretold that there was a defeat by the Roman Empire, and after a few years, the Romans will reverse the defeat and they will defeat the Persian Empire, as we are told in Surah Ar-Rum. If I don't believe that the Quran is a miracle of the Prophet, and I don't believe in miracles, then I will say that Surah Ar-Rum is not a prophecy, but somebody wrote it after the Roman defeat had been reversed. It was written later, and people said that it was a prophecy. Kind of like today, if I say that I could have predicted all along that Donald Trump would have been the Republican nominee. If I pretend that I wrote it in my diary earlier, then that is pretend and not real. If I don't believe that the Prophet was a prophet, and I don't believe the Quran is a miracle, then I will not accept that Surah Ar-Rum is one of the miracles of the Prophet. And if there is some historical evidence, if there is a copy of Surah Ar-Rum, for example, discovered that was written in the lifetime of the Prophet, then I might say that, well, maybe there's something wrong with the data. Maybe there's something wrong with the carbon-14 dating. It must be inaccurate because I don't believe that there could be a prophecy. If, however, I do believe in the miraculousness of the Quran, then it is not far-fetched for me to say the Prophet told the people about what was going to happen because he had been informed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, which one of those two opinions is objective and which one of them is subjective? Which one of them is just the facts and which one of them is the facts plus an opinion or the facts plus a theology? In our society, we're sometimes trained to think that if you deny God, and if you deny prophethood, and you deny miracles, then you are being objective. But that is also a belief, which you need to justify. And so you are not being objective, you are interpreting and manipulating the data because you have a certain belief that exists. Whether your belief is to accept God or reject God, in both cases they are a belief. And neither one is objective. Neither one is a default position. The reason why I want to say this is because when it comes to the history, just the facts that are reported are not going to tell us whether Imam Ali and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein had a single principle that inspired all of them, or whether they had a different seerah. But we can look to that history to get certain hints. And if we understand that we have to analyze and determine how to interpret, there is no default way to understand and to interpret historical facts, then it will become easier for us to get a meaningful and an accurate conclusion. Now, this might seem to be a little bit difficult, but because it is an important part in understanding the lessons that we learn from the life of Imam Hassan, I ask for just a few more minutes of your attention. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. How do we resolve this seeming inconsistency? Look at the following facts which are reported in history. All will agree that Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam did not compromise in his stated principles. Regardless of whether I say he was good and accurate in his decision making, or whether I say he was mistaken, as some people do. Regardless of whether I say that he was wise, or whether I say that perhaps he didn't have that political sophistication that others had, which is the opinion that some people say. In both cases, this is a matter of agreement that Imam Ali did not compromise his stated principles. That is something which is without doubt. At the same time, we see that there is no doubt that Imam Ali considered Imam Hassan to be his successor. There was never a claim made by Imam Hussein that, you know what, I am more loyal to the principles and the methodology of Amir al-Mu'mineen than my brother Hassan is. Not a claim was made by Imam Hussein, nor was a statement ever made by Amir al-Mu'mineen, nor even by any of the Shia or the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Was anybody ever under the impression that maybe we could skip Imam Hassan, na'udhu billah, and Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam should be the rightful heir of Imam Ali? So, if we want to believe that the superficial history or that superficial analysis is accurate, Imam Ali had one personality, he was willing to go to war. And Imam Hassan did not like to go to war, he was pragmatic. And Imam Hussein was more similar to Imam Ali. Then how do you explain the fact that Imam Ali, who was not compromising in any of his principles, said, and the family of Imam Ali and Imam Hussein himself, without any doubt or hesitation, agreed that it was Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wasalam who was the rightful heir and successor to Amir al-Mu'mineen? That by itself tells us that there must be something which unites what seems to be different. What is that source of difference? Is it different circumstances? Is it different requirements that are needed to raise and to train the Shi'i community and the Muslim community? Whatever those circumstances might be. The very first objection we have to those who say that Imam Hassan was different from Imam Ali and Imam Hussein was different from Imam Hassan is to say that why is it then that Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam was appointed by Imam Ali to be his heir, and nobody in the family of Imam Ali, and in particular Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam, had even the slightest objection to it? To the extent that when Imam Hassan made his peace treaty with Muawiyah and he left Kufa, did Imam Hussein say that I will stay in Kufa and try to manage and change the policies that were taken by Imam Hassan? Or was he a follower and an obedient member of the family of Imam Hassan? Imam Hassan was the Imam, and Imam Hussein, for the duration of that imamate, is not reported ever to have departed in word or deed from the command of Imam Hassan Mujtaba alayhi salatu wassalam. So the first thing we see is that consensus. The second thing we see is that from Imam Hassan there is an equal consensus among Ahlul Bayt that Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam is the rightful heir of Imam Hassan. Although there were people who were quietist. Abdullah ibn Abbas was known as being quietist. Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah was known as being quietist. And some of these same people and their children later on were considered by some people to be role models and leaders of the Muslim Ummah. But in the mind of Imam Hassan and in the practice of Imam Hassan, there was no hesitation and no doubt but to say that after me, the position of leadership of the Muslim Ummah is to go to Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. And in my mind, probably the best argument we have for what the proper conception of Imamat was in the mind of Ahlul Bayt, and for the consistency in the principles of Ahlul Bayt, is to see the way in which the Imamat was passed from Imam Ali to Imam Hassan and from Imam Hassan to Imam Hussein. Alayhim as-salatu was-salam jami'an. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And why do I say that? Because if you look at the history of Saqifa and the early history of Islam, there have been hundreds of books and ahadith and stories that have been concocted and false tales that have been told to hide what took place after the Prophet. False ahadith were attributed to the Prophet himself. False stories were concocted about what took place after the death of the Prophet. False ahadith were attributed to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam. And so for many Muslims, there is a confusion about what took place. Was Imam Ali alayhi salam satisfied with the caliphate of the first caliph, or was he not satisfied? Well, both of those are reported in history. And so for many people, it becomes difficult for them to understand. But if you want to know what Imam Ali believed and what he practiced, then what better example do you have than to look at when Imam Ali is on his deathbed and to see how did he conceive of the leadership of the Muslim Ummah passing on after his time. This is something where you don't have those false concocted stories, where no Muslim, not even a Sunni Muslim or a non-Shia Muslim, can say there's so many reports, I don't know what was going on. Because there is a consistency. And the consistency is this, that Imam Ali called his family and he said that my wasi is my son Hassan Mujtaba alayhi salatu wassalam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And he said for all of his associates and family members that they are to obey Imam Hassan. And then he conveyed that after Imam Hassan, it is his obligation to pass on the wasaya to Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. Just as it was an obligation of Imam Ali to pass it to Imam Hassan, it was an obligation of Imam Hassan to pass it to Imam Hussein. So in summary, the life of Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam is one that has been clouded over with many false imputations and false stories. But it is actually the part of Islamic history that gives us the clearest conception of what was the nature of leadership and what was the nature of imamat in the view of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. And in reality, the imamat of Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam is a hujjah and a proof against those who say that the successorship of the Prophet was to be determined by the Muslim Ummah. Because Imam Ali did not say that it is up to you to choose whoever you want. He said that my wasi is my son Hassan, and it is up to you to obey and be worshipful, or to disobey and be sinful. And so this was one of the most important lessons we learn from the life of our beloved Imam. We don't have time to talk about some of the teachings of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba, but that nature of imamat, the nature of the inheritance of the Prophet, and the fact that there was a single light of guidance that animated the lives of our Imams. It is illustrated in the way in which they not only lived their lives, but they passed on the torch of guidance to the Imam after them. Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba is the one Imam in our history who perhaps has been wronged by having been forgotten. He was the heir of Amirul Mu'mineen. He was the Imam for whom even Imam Hussein was obligated to listen and obey. Was not somebody that we can say is not an important personality for our religious understanding and relationship. So to come back to the question that we had at the beginning, was there a consistent principle or a divergent principle that animated the lives of our Imams? The answer to that must come from understanding the consensus and the consistency in the chain of leadership that was set in motion by the Prophet, and that was continued by Imam Ali, and continued by Imam Hassan, and continued by Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. And that chain of guidance is what we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to connect us to. There are many events that are reported in history, but it is only with insight and with a penetrating analysis that we will be able to understand the true significance of those events. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that on this day of the anniversary of the birth of Imam Hassan alayhi salatu wassalam, that this hidden aspect of the wasiyah of the Prophet becomes better known first and foremost among the followers of Ahlul Bayt, and second of all among the broader Muslim community. Because all of the war and all of the animosity and all of the ill will that we have in the Muslim Ummah, that can only be resolved if we understand this wasiyah and the nature of the wasiyah. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to answer our du'as, to fulfill our hajat, and to unite us with the Prophet and his progeny in the hereafter. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.